Okay, so we just had the few questions that we sent you in the email earlier, but our first question is just, when was the idea of the name change proposed?
I don't actually have like a specific date. I was looking through my emails. I'll have to see if I can do a better forensic on my emails to see exactly what date that was. It coincided with, it was a long process. It took over a year actually to get the name change of the program through the administration of, I think, Cornell. And I think it actually had to go to the state because the American Indian program is part of the state side of Cornell and the public side. And so, but the reason I felt it was important to consider the name change is that we hung on to American Indian because that's actually part of the language that's used in the federal Indian law. So we thought it was strategic to hang on to that because in federal Indian law, American Indian is actually the way in which we are referred to. And then, but the field, which I have been a part of, the American Indian, Native American and Indigenous Studies Association from its inception, which I believe was 2004, but you may want to fact check that one. And so it was an organization that came together around the changes in the field of Native American or American Indian Studies. So the field actually was first identified as American Indian Studies, and then some people began using Native American Studies. But then when there was an international focus in the field, I think that's when the use of the language of Indigenous really emerged. And, you know, the truth is none of them are adequate, you know, as far as, like, I always suggest to my students when they're writing, they be specific as possible. So don't use broad terminologies unless you're framing an argument, but then be specific about where the Indigenous knowledge comes from. It's not just the Indigenous knowledge, but it's actually, you know, Haudenosaunee, and then specifically it would be like Mohawk or Tuscarora, or, you know, you'd want to be specific. But the use of these like umbrella terms actually suggests, you know, some common philosophical and certainly political experiences. And so I think that's probably the more important piece of it, because the you know, the American Indian and Native American and Indigenous studies really signal the relationship to settler states. And so it automatically triggers, you know, an understanding of this, you know, colonized or colonial relationship. I would argue colonial, not colonized, but colonial. I resist the language of colonization because, you know, it suggests an element of defeat or, you know, letting go. And so, yes, people have continuously tried to colonize us, but we still resist, right? And I think that's really what, you know, some of these, you know, terminologies are set in place to actually address. And so I know it's a bit long-winded, but that's really kind of the thinking that informed why it was important to update the name of the program in order to signal the potential to do. Many of us do research internationally, comparative Indigenous studies internationally or globally, and you know, that's where I thought it would be useful.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. We were also wondering if there was any opposition to the name change, other than or obstacles as well. I know you had to get it, you said you had to get it approved by the government, but if there was anything other than that, that you had to kind of overcome to get the.
You know, there really wasn't much debate amongst the faculty. I mean, we already have faculty, because my own work spans across Aotearoa or New Zealand, Australia, the circumpolar north, including, the Inuit and the Scandinavian indigenous locations. And, Professor Kassam's work is in the Tiber Mountains, working with indigenous peoples there. We have people already doing work hemispherically in Latin America, Central America. So I think the faculty were ready for this, and there was no concern within the college, or once we moved the proposal from through the college. And I'm not sure, I think that it needed to go through, I'll have to check and see if it went, I don't know if it went through the faculty senate. I don't think because it's a program, I don't think we had to go through the faculty senate, but there would be a record if we did. Okay. And so I'm a representative now, and I'll see if I can get that record for you if it happened. I'm not sure it happened though. So no, I don't think there was opposition. I mean, maybe some faculty in the program didn't understand it or weren't supportive of it, but they didn't voice an opinion at the time, so.
That's great, thanks. I feel like in a way we sort of like already hit all the points we wanted to ask. I suppose, obviously you were like sort of the leading voice behind the name change, but we were wondering who else had like a large part in this.
At the time, the associate director was Mario Caro, that's C-A-R-O. He only spent a short period of time here at Cornell. And he was a positive proponent of asserting the name change. He helped with filing the paperwork and moving that through the system. And also, it's possible that Mario fielded questions maybe from some faculty that maybe weren't. But, I never got feedback from him that there was concern. I think that it wasn't, I don't think it was really met with either enthusiasm or opposition. And I would argue that some of the faculty perhaps weren't as sensitive then to like the difference between practicing as a scholar within the field of American Indian history and American Indian studies, American Indian and Indigenous studies. And so there's a difference there. And so, I would argue that the Indigenous, the insertion of Indigenous, trying to really signal the centering of Indigenous protocols, methodologies, philosophies, or epistemologies, in contrast to what I would argue is like an earlier iteration of this, where American Indian Studies was an offshoot of the field of American history. And so I think that's a significant thing, that American Indian and Indigenous Studies signals, and I thought it was important to signal this, that it's a separate field and it has separate methodologies and research protocols, and that it's centering Indigenous knowledge and history. And so that's really, I think, the conceptual shift that it signals. And for people who are in the field, they recognize this. And I thought it was important for recruitment. I thought it was important in particular to attract top-notch graduate students that are sensitive to this and looking for it. And so, you know, even though it may not have been at the forefront of this understanding amongst my colleagues or the university, within the field, I felt it was our responsibility to be in keeping with the developments within the field. And so I thought it was important to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was also just curious. I feel like nowadays there is some contention over the usage of the term Indian, especially like more so among non-Indigenous people, and that like that term was kept in the name. Was there any like hesitation over that, or I'm assuming probably in the field it's a very common term, and obviously, as you said, that's the federal term used is American Indian.
I mean, it's interesting because one of my intellectual mentors was John Mohawk, who is a Seneca scholar and very well respected, certainly within international Indigenous politics. And so Professor Mohawk would say that, you know, all of these terms are the ideas that are coming from the outside. We refer to ourselves in really different ways. And so the arc from when I began practicing as an academic to where it's now went from the use of American Indian to Native Indian, American Indian, Native American, and now the incorporation of Indigenous. But I think more importantly, it also went from the use of, or the insistence upon referring to, in particular when you're writing or doing scholarship, being very specific about the location of that knowledge. So like, for instance, you know, like if you were talking about a specific Mohawk tradition, it's appropriate to say Haudenosaunee and then locate the the Mohawk Nation are one of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee to understand that political organization. But it's equally important now to also, I think you can also reflect the use of indigenous languages, or the use of our own languages to identify ourselves in our own language. So you'll often see now, not just Mohawk, but then Ganyagahage, which is, of course, the Mohawk word for the way in which the Mohawk refer to themselves in their language. And so this is what actually prompted, and this is what I'm going to talk about with the other group, the necessity for scholars in the field to also be able to understand Indigenous languages. And one may not be able to speak the language, but I think it's important to be able to understand the orthography of Indigenous languages so that one could pronounce the words with some integrity, right? And so, and of course, with over 500 Indigenous peoples in the Americas alone, I mean, it's impossible to consider being able to do every single one of them. That's where I focused on being able to read orthographies, because then at least you could, have a go at, some kind of integral translation. And so I think that, all of these things are sort of, like really about the development or the maturity of this field, right? And so like the idea, and I think it also is about the increase or rise of Indigenous peoples in practice or in academia, because on the ground, or like often people use the term grassroots, like at home, in the community. That's another, popular way that people define these spaces. People in community are actually, I think, much further along than academics are in terms of reclaiming our languages and the active use of our languages. And so I would argue that actually in the academy, peoples are just beginning to catch up, right? So like, and why does this become important? Because if you're doing research in our territories or in any Indigenous territory, there are expected protocols now, that you would be able to greet the community in their own language, that you would be able to spell and provide correct grammatical orthographies when writing about their peoples, or to be able to do an extended footnote about the changes in the way in which they refer to themselves, right? And so, because I'm in the field of art history, and a number of artists that I deal with are coming from all these different communities all over the world, Indigenous communities, having this skill becomes very important, because if you're writing a label in a catalog and get somebody's attribution, their heritage, their identity, their positionality wrong, it's actually, quite serious, and there are consequences for it. People get very angry with you for not being attentive to this. And so it is, it's like people don't really like, and this is sort of like, I think, the rise in the respect for the subjecthood of Indigenous peoples, rather than sort of like blanket statements, right? And so, because, if you are a Swiss artist, you would not want to be referred to as a German artist, right? And it's as straightforward as that. And so if you're Anishinaabe, you would want to be referred to appropriately. And, and so my students, are educated to be attentive to, okay, there are a number of different spellings of Anishinaabe. There are a number of different ways that people in that language family refer to themselves. And so they have to be responsible to really understanding what's the correct one for that artist and how to do this. So, I mean, there are real practical applications for why these changes happened. And I think we were, a little ahead of our time, as far as like we're at the forefront of this, but I do think because we're a Tier 1 research institute, that's what we should be doing, right? And so we shouldn't now just be changing our name to include this broader scope. We did it when it was appropriate, so.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That was a lot of helpful information that we can understand the context of this a lot better. So thank you for that. Allison, did you have any other questions? Or?
Yeah, just on that topic, do you think that Cornell's name change will incline other colleges and universities to change their names, the names of their programs as well?
I mean, I felt that when I came, I was recruited to Cornell I think it's been about 12 years ago. And when I came to Cornell because the American Indian program was a leader in the field. I don't think we have maintained that position because we haven't had the institutional support. And other programs have now become departments. At that period of time, we had one of the largest Indigenous studies or Native American studies faculty in academia. And I think that with some faculty who have gone on to other universities, and then departments made decisions not to hire Indigenous faculty to replace them, I think we've lost ground. I don't think, and so I'm not sure that people are looking to our program any longer for that leadership position. I do think the speaker series makes a difference. That gives us an indication of who's watching. And when the year that we were on completely on Zoom, we had enormously large audiences. We had over 300 people attending each lecture. And so I would say at that moment, you know, people were looking. But I do think that since even in the state of New York, you know, the SUNY Buffalo has now transitioned to having a Department of Indigenous Studies. We see the Haudenosaunee Promise at Syracuse University, which is also a critical factor. I think that, you know, we've lost ground, and where once, because of Oguego, which was the first Native American residence on an academic campus in North America, we had a huge leg up, right? And it was something that people look to. We've had other universities come to Cornell to look at Oguego and try to understand how it's located within our academic practice. I always tried to keep Oguego part of our academic mission. I don't really think that is happening strategically any longer. And so, you know, I don't think we have that edge anymore.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, I remember coming to Cornell and being surprised that the program was just like a minor, and I was like, that would be cool if it was a major too, just in terms of that size.
Yeah, no, I mean, right. I mean, we,
Mhm.
you know, even other programs now have majors, right? And so like Syracuse University has a major. It's still a program, but it has a major in Native American Studies. And so, I mean, but you need like institutional support in order to make this happen. And there has always been a struggle just to maintain a staff in AIIS. And now with the dearth of workers, you know, like people who want to do staff positions, you know, it's been just an uphill battle just to keep things moving forward, you know. And so, you know, I can't really fault Kurt or, you know, my colleagues. It's, you know, it's like you need more than just a faculty director. You need more than just 1 or 2 employees in order to actually make these transitions happen. And I think because Cornell's a land grant institution, it's obligated to do this. And in particular, I'm sure you're familiar with the dispossession project. I do think there's an ethical obligation. So, but really great questions. And I'm really glad that you're thinking about this. So I hope this was helpful today, because I have to move on to another call. You feel like you got what you needed?
Yes, that was extremely helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I appreciate
Well,
it.
if you need me to respond to anything, please don't hesitate to reach out, okay? And I really apologize for the time mix-up, Allison.
Oh, don't worry about
It was
it.
on me. You had communicated very well.
We didn't need the whole hour anyway. It worked out.
Okay. Yes. Okay, great. Well, listen, it was nice to meet you, and I wish you well with your project.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.